Okay, so I was saying that good evening, everyone. My name is Laura Colini. I work for Tessere, part of the consortium that is contributing to the Inhabit project that is led by the University of Córdoba. And with us, we have the coordinator, Maria del Mar Delgado Serrano, and Rocio Perez, that are leading and coordinating the work of 4 cities partnering in this project: the city of Córdoba, the city of Lucca, the city of Nitra, and the city of Riga. The topic of very broadly of Inhabit, it's well described on the website, but very shortly I can say that Inhabit deals with inclusive well-being with a gender perspective in cities. And each of the member cities, they look at the concept of inclusive health and well-being from a different perspective. On neighborhood policies, looking at reconnecting different parts of cities through greening, creating a new concept for human-animal bonds for enjoyment of cities' public space. With obviously an inclusive approach and perspective. And then we have the city of Riga, who is working on recreation of a market hub at the center of the city, using local markets and local produce opportunities in the area, resources in the area. So having said that, one of the challenge of this work is to create a co-design, co-producive collaboration with different stakeholders to implement visionary plans that are regenerating the areas that are targeted by each of the partners. And one important part, as I said, is the gender perspective in both in the co-design as well as in the implementation of the plans. And in the implementation part, now we just finished the design part, but in the implementation phase, there are some pacts that are co-designed with the partners belonging to the hub, the Inhabit hub. And so we thought that it could be very interesting to have Matthew Jackson, who's an expert on public procurement. Has been Matthew working for European programs like URBAC. That's where I got to know Matthew. And that's I'm very, very happy that you accepted our invitation to be with us. And Matthew has been working for, as I said, for many cities, first leading a network on public procurement with an URBAC, but also providing a training on public procurement for all URBAC cities, also representing URBAC in the EU Urban Agenda partnership on public procurement. And recently we worked together with Matthew, also within URBAC, on gender responsive public procurement. So we thought that could be particularly interesting for our cities in Inhabit to have his point of view, to use his knowledge, and also to get some ideas on how to design a pact for Inhabit cities. I stop my talk and I give the floor to Matthew, and welcoming you and also thanking you for being with us.
Laura, thanks so much for the kind words and for the invitation. I'm really excited by this session. Gender responsive public procurement is not something that always kind of rings as an exciting topic for an afternoon workshop. So hopefully we're going to make this quite fun. We're going to make this quite interactive, but at the same time, this is also very serious because we have real challenges around not only gender inequality across Europe, but also a range of other forms of poverty and inequality. So the lessons learned from this session can be applied to a range of other urban policy areas. So as Laura said, I'm Matthew Jackson. Just to give you a little bit of background to how I've ended up here talking about gender responsive public procurement. So I've spent the last 20 years doing work around local economic development primarily. So I spent 13 years working for a think tank called the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, or CLES for short, which was focused upon improving the way in which cities go about improving local economic development. So to make sure that every economic activity within a city is undertaken in an inclusive way, in a way that enables poverty and inequality to be addressed, and that enables sustainable urban development. So the first health warning to you is that I've never actually bought anything through a procurement process, right? But I've developed quite a lot of knowledge around how cities, in particular, can change the way in which they think about procurement. So my work around procurement started probably in about 2008, and there were three strands to that work. One, I wanted to support cities to measure and understand where their procurement spend goes. So we'll find out a little bit later in the conversation that cities spend across Europe 2,000 billion euros every year buying goods and services. Now, for me, that is a number difficult to get my head around, right? It's a huge amount of money. It's 14% of GDP. But when I started this work around procurement, cities did not have any idea where that money was going. So what types of suppliers they were spending money with, who those suppliers were, where those suppliers were based, what types of organizations were they, whether they were big, corporate, multinational organizations, or social enterprises or cooperatives. So the first part of my work was about helping cities to understand where money goes. The second part of my work was about changing the way in which procurement people behave. I'm not sure if we've got anybody on the call who would describe themselves as a procurement officer, but traditionally, historically, procurement officers think in particular ways. They think about the law, which is obviously very important. They think about the cost, so the price of the product that they're buying, and they think a little bit about quality. But my question was, do they really think about some of the social, economic, environmental challenges facing the place in which they're buying that product for? So that was the second bit of my work. It was about changing behavior, influencing the way in which procurement officers think and behave. And then the third bit was about suppliers themselves. So businesses and other organizations that are contracted to deliver goods and services, what additional benefit do they bring? What way do they contribute towards addressing wider challenges and wider goals? So that work then led me to Urbact. I've done a lot of work in the UK, where I'm from, and Urbact were looking for a specific expert to provide advice, guidance around what is termed strategic procurement. And we'll talk a little bit more detail about that a little bit later on in the presentation. So I was the lead expert for three Urbact networks that have focused upon the topic of procurement. The first one, Procure, was about getting cities to think differently about procurement. So that strand of work I was talking about. The second one, Making Spend Matter, was about a specific methodology that enables cities to understand where their spend goes. And the third one was about embedding more social and environmental considerations into procurement processes. And that's how we ended up producing two training courses on strategic procurement and on gender responsive procurement. And that's what I want to do today. I want to talk a little bit about that journey and also to get you thinking a little bit differently about how you progress and change the way in which you undertake procurement in your cities. We're not going to get too technical, don't worry, don't panic. But what we want to do is really think through about how you can change behavior with a particular emphasis upon gender responsive public procurement. Now, gender equality is a significant issue, challenge, opportunity for cities and organizations across Europe. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a mix of me talking a little bit. We're going to have a mix of training videos, which I hope work. And then we're going to have a mix of tasks because I want this to be interactive for you to contribute to the conversation as well. So I'm just going to share
governments and municipalities.
Matthew, just for a second, I haven't said that because I had I'm at home and it was ringing, so I had to stop. But I want just to say that we have with you something like 1 hour for you to manage the whole thing and speak as we agreed. And I want to invite everyone who's in the call to write down questions while listening to what Matthew is saying. And then we can have a moment where you also can express your ideas, but also think of opportunities and proposals that concerns your specific project to share with Matthew. So thank you very much. And sorry, please go ahead, Matthew. Thanks.
That's okay, Laura. Thank you. So I just want to start by just talking a little bit about the agenda. Now, when I was putting this together, I put myself in the position of you as attendees and thought about the types of questions that I would want to be asking of an expert around gender responsive public procurement. So we're going to talk around each of these questions throughout the course of the presentation. So why is public procurement and gender equality important? Why is that an important topic, urban themes for cities? Second, how can cities be more strategic in public procurement? So how can cities generally change the way in which they think about public procurement so it delivers local economic, social and environmental benefits? Three, we're going to do a little bit of a definition. What do we mean exactly by gender responsive public procurement? Fourth, we're then going to talk about barriers. So what barriers do cities generally face in embedding gender considerations into public procurement processes? Fifth, we're going to then talk about how those barriers can be overcome. And we're going to talk about policy. We're going to talk about the process of designing goods and services. And we're going to talk about procurement processes themselves, so in terms of tendering. And then the last bit is we're going to talk about how you are going to use that learning. So that's the bit that Laura was kind of suggesting, that we would have that conversation and an opportunity for questions and for comments and for thoughts. So, as I said, we're going to have a mix of videos. My fingers are crossed that this is going to work properly and everyone's going to be able to hear everything. We had a bit of a test with Lorenzo and Luis before, but I'm going to start with the first video, which is about why is procurement important?
There are three main reasons why procurement is important and why URBACT continues to focus on it. First, member states, regional governments and municipalities spend a lot of money buying goods and services each year. Around 2,000 billion euros. It's a significant amount of money and around 14% of gross domestic product. Second, this money is often provided by taxpayers, meaning that procurement has to be transparent and accountable to citizens. And third, procurement can be used as a lever to contribute towards the many challenges that Europe faces, including unemployment, skill shortages, poverty, and the climate emergency, making procurement integral to integrated urban development.
Great. Did that all work for everyone? Was everyone able to hear for that? Just a quick thumbs up from Laura if you were. Great, good. That's my panic over. I've been sweating all night that the videos wouldn't work. So that was the first bit. This is why procurement is important. And this is why I started work on this, because there's a perception that procurement is really boring, it's really bureaucratic, it's really technical, because we have lots of laws and legislation that we need to think about. But for me, procurement is it's really exciting, because across Europe we face so many challenges. This isn't just about buying a product or buying a service or buying a construction project. This is about contributing towards addressing wider challenges and wider issues, whether that be around inequality, whether that be around local economies, whether that be around some of the social challenges that we face around workforces and skills, or whether that be around probably the most prevalent challenge that we face around the climate emergency. So in my mind, procurement is not boring, it's not technical, but it's actually really exciting and an opportunity to be innovative. And I've talked with lots of cities about this, and the starting point is always, oh, we can't do that because EU procurement law doesn't let us do it. My response to that always is the EU procurement directives have become a lot more flexible in recent years. So there's an opportunity really to think about how you can use procurement to address wider social and environmental goals. So that's the first bit. I just wanted to hold that thought until we come to the discussion around how you feel about procurement yourselves, and we'll revisit that a little bit later on. So, second video, why is gender equality important?
URBAC launched its first report on gender equal cities in 2019 to raise awareness of gender-based inequalities at a local level and to highlight how cities can take action. In spite of progress made, we still see that inequality is persistent. The goal of gender equality policy is that women and men should have the same power to shape society and their own lives. Local governments have a legal obligation to counteract gender discrimination, and they have the power to make our cities more equitable. One of the most important tools at our disposal is gender mainstreaming. It involves the integration of a gender perspective into the preparation, design, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of policies, regulatory measures and spending programmes, with a view to promoting equality between women and men and combating discrimination.
Great. And then similar thoughts, really. So how do I feel perhaps about gender equality? I mean, people will have different perspectives here, but personally, I think it's really important because we've got real challenges in terms of gender inequality, particularly when it comes to pay in the workforce. Others may think, well, this is an impossible agenda. We're never going to get to equality between men and women when it comes to all forms of kind of society and all forms of life. Another perception around gender equality is it's quite specialist. There's specific teams working in municipalities that are focused upon addressing inequality or addressing poverty. It's quite a niche sort of thing. And then the perception that this is just about women. This is some sort of kind of feminist agenda. But actually, there are challenges here across men and women when it comes to equality as well. So this is the starting points, right? So we've defined why procurement is important. We've defined why gender inequality is important. I just want to start with a little bit of a presentation around exactly what we mean by strategic procurement. And it goes back to those procurement officers I was talking about earlier, and the way in which they behave. So historically, procurement has been driven by legislation from the EU. It's been driven by the need to achieve the cheapest possible price for a product. So if you were buying this pen, you would want to know that you can get that pen for 10 cents as opposed to 15 cents, right? And you would choose the cheaper pen because that makes the most economic sense. And they also think a little bit about quality. So what's the quality of the potential supplier that's going to deliver that good or service? Now at URBAC, we started to think a little bit differently about procurement. It's not just about the cost, it's not just about legislation, but it's about the way in which that product or service can contribute towards addressing wider challenges. How can we use procurement to create jobs? How can we use procurement to improve skills amongst the population? How can we use procurement to reduce carbon emissions? How can we use procurement to support local, small to medium-sized enterprises? And that's what we mean by strategic procurement. It's about thinking through the range of different strategic areas that a procurement process can contribute towards. And procurement is not just about making that decision to buy that pen. There's a range of different things that you need to go through to enable that purchase to be effective, and to enable that purchase to be efficient. And that's what we call the cycle of procurement. So it starts at stage 1 and it goes through to stage 6. And I'm just going to give a few examples of each of those stages of the procurement cycle before we go on to move specifically about gender responsive public procurement, which I think is an aspect of that strategic procurement. So these are ways in which cities can become more strategic in their procurement processes and practices. The first is through spend analysis, understanding where that money goes. The first time I did work around spend analysis was with the city of Manchester, so my home city, and they had €1 billion of spend that they had no idea where it went. So the work was to try and understand where that money went geographically, which sectors of the economy money was being spent with, so manufacturing, construction, finance, energy, and what types of organisations that money was being spent with. So was it with small to medium-sized enterprises? Was it with social enterprises? Was it with large multinational corporations? And that gives a city a starting point. It gives a city a baseline figure of where their procurement money goes. The city of Famalicão in Portugal undertakes spend analysis on an annual basis. They look at everything they've spent through a procurement process and they understand where that money goes. The second way in which cities can be more strategic in procurement is by identifying the exact strategic outcomes that they want their procurement processes to contribute towards, right? So do they want to use procurement as a lever to address unemployment? Do they want to use it as a way of reducing carbon emissions? Do they want to use it as a way of improving skills? Do they want to use it as a way of improving levels of volunteering within the community? That's really important to set out exactly what you want to achieve. And when we come to gender responsive procurement, one of those outcomes will obviously be around reducing gender inequality. So just a couple of examples of cities here. Preston in the UK has set a very strong policy narrative of what they want to do through their procurement processes. They want to reduce the amount of money that's been extracted out of the Preston economy and is perhaps going to tax havens in the Cayman Islands or in Switzerland and to big multinational shareholders. So they've got a narrative. We want to kind of change the way in which we spend so it brings greater local economic benefit. The regional government of Navarra in the Basque Country in Spain, they've developed a social value procurement policy and framework, which outlines very, very clearly what outcomes they want to achieve. The third way in the way in which cities become more strategic is what I would call commissioning. This is when you're designing the good or service that you want to buy. So if you're building a new school, that is what I would term commissioning. It's the design of that school, it's the design of that product, it's the design of that service. And this is where you really need to start to think about those strategic outcomes. So if you want to think about how you're going to address unemployment as part of the procurement of that school, as part of the construction of the procurement of that school, it's this stage where you need to think about it in the procurement process. So these are not procurement people that are thinking about this. These are technical people who are working in municipality departments and other organisations. Three ways in which you become more strategic is to think across your municipality. So not just involve the organisation, the department that's looking to buy that product or service, but also perhaps involve economic development and other departments within the municipality. The city of Candelaria in Tenerife, they involve citizens in their decision-making processes when it comes to procurement processes and practices. So citizens are involved in designing the goods and services they want, and then making a decision on which supplier is awarded the contract. The second thing is to build that in a very early stage, as I've just said. Garbeck in Belgium, they've got significant challenges with unemployment. So regardless of what they're looking to buy, whether that be the pen, whether that be the construction project, whether that be a health service, they're also thinking about, well, how can we use this to address unemployment? And then the third bit is to engage with a potential market. This is really important because if you are going to become more strategic in procurement, you also need to make sure that your suppliers are aware of what you're looking to achieve. So those outcomes that we talked about earlier. The fourth bit is then the technical bit of procurement, the tender exercise, the procurement exercise itself. So those outcomes, you can't just ask a question, how are you going to be more strategic in procurement to a supplier, or what social value are you going to deliver? You have to be very, very specific. So how many jobs are you going to create if your outcome is upon unemployment? How are you going to create those jobs? So how are you going to engage with different brokers of employment opportunities? The municipality of Haarlem in the Netherlands have got a really nice checklist of questions that they can ask in the procurement process. The fifth and the sixth bits are then about decision making. So cities can become more strategic by awarding a particular percentage of their procurement decision making process to strategic procurement issues. So they could say, look, 40% of our decision making is around cost, 40% is around quality, 20% is around how this supplier is going to contribute towards reducing unemployment. And then the last bit of being more strategic, this is about contract management. There's no point going through that whole process of thinking through outcomes if you're not going to measure the impact. So you want to know when a supplier is delivering that good or service, what impact they're having, whether they're contributing to those outcomes that you previously identified. I'm conscious that I've gone probably very, very quickly through that. There's going to be lots of questions, but I just thought it was important to frame the conversation around gender responsive procurement by looking more strategically at procurement. Because I think that gender responsibility is an outcome that we can include in that procurement process. So moving on, what is gender responsive public procurement? Here we go.
Gender responsive public procurement is a key component of the gender mainstreaming Sally has just described. It seeks to promote gender equality through the purchase of goods, services and works by public sector bodies at every stage of the procurement cycle. This means that procurers think about gender equality in the design of goods and services, in the questions they ask during tendering, and in the monitoring of the performance of the supplier. It does not necessarily imply higher costs, but it does require knowledge and capacity.
So what we're thinking about there is we're thinking about gender equality through each of those 6 steps of the procurement cycle that I talked about. So in terms of spend analysis, so we're thinking about whether we have women-owned enterprises currently delivering goods and services. We're thinking about it in the identification of outcomes. Do we have specific outcomes that we want to achieve through procurement about gender equality? We're thinking about it in commissioning, so in the design of goods and services. We're thinking about it in the tender process, so we're asking questions about gender equality. We're thinking about it in decision making, and we're thinking about it in monitoring and the extent to which suppliers are delivering upon those outcomes. People always say to me, you know, there's a challenge here. There's a legal challenge around this because sometimes it reduces competitiveness between different suppliers, not only on a geographical basis, but also on their ability to deliver contracts and to deliver services. But this is very much within the framework of EU procurement legislation. So as part of the training course we developed for URBACT, we asked Anna Luppi, who works for, she works with DG Grow, she works within one of the European Commission departments, to explain exactly what the legal framework to gender responsive public procurement is. I'm going to play that video now.
But how can we use the 2,000 billion euros of annual procurement spend across the member states to create jobs, improve skills, address poverty inequality and climate change? Since the publication of the EU procurement directives in 2014, we at the Commission have actively sought to encourage public buyers to contribute towards wider societal and environmental goals. Sitting alongside the Green New Deal and COVID-19 recovery, the issue of addressing inequality is central to the Commission's policy priorities in the 2020s. We recognize the need to address inequality on the basis of income, race, gender, and many other factors, and move towards a more equal Europe. We strive to help public authorities to improve the process of procurement nationally and for cities, particularly around gender-responsive procurement. In its gender equality strategy for 2020-2025, The European Commission announced the publication of its Buying Social Guide on Socially Responsible Public Procurement as a tool to help fight discrimination and promote gender equality in public tenders. As one of the first deliverables of the EU Gender Equality Strategy for 2020-2025, the Commission proposed binding measures on pay transparency under the draft directive on pay transparency, which specifically addresses equal pay and the pay gap in the context of public procurement. Procurement legislation and policy is a key part of what the Commission does. And as we strive for a more equal and just Europe, we need to make sure that all our policies and practices are gender responsive.
Great. So there's a much bigger picture to this, right? So this is not just about kind of local level, city level policy and practice. This is a directive from the Commission. So it's not just about the Green New Deal. This is also about kind of that gender equality plan that Anna talked about there. So this is really important. This is a really important agenda. And there's almost, I see it as a real opportunity for cities to think about procurement and to think about gender equality quite differently. But as I said before, there's lots and lots of barriers, lots and lots of challenges that cities in particular face when it comes to being more strategic around procurement. So as part of the training course, we also asked cities from the Gendered Landscape Action Planning Network to talk about some of the challenges that they felt they will face in implementing gender responsive public procurement. And this is what they said.
It's very new and it is not understood at the moment, I think, just because nobody knows what gender responsible procurement is and how to do it and what are, the elements of it. And also, like, generally, I think that in my country, things are changing slowly, but still in Estonia in general, I think this gender equality is still perceived as some kind of feminist thing. And people, they don't understand that gender equality involves men as well. It's not only about the woman. And I also think that maybe one challenge is also related to legislation and legal framework, and we don't have that in place. Also in national level, we don't do gender responsive procurements. We don't have those criteria and we don't know how to use even them. So I think that is one of those biggest, let's say, challenges or obstacles at the moment.
For having gender embedded in the procurement, I think we need it to be embedded in both the procurement policy but also in checklist, in communication. So even if we have people hired to work specifically with sustainability in procurement, we kind of need that everyone that works with procurement can have a gender responsive lens. So I think that's the main barrier, but also main development area to have that written, to have gender responsive questions written in all those documents, and not only the policy, but throughout the whole process.
Gender responsive procurement clauses are not like a checkbox that it's something that you are forced to do. It's something that you have to do for a good. So you must understand how to use it, and it's something that you can, it's kind of a creative work if you use it well. And I think that there's people that use it in a way that it's just, okay, yeah, I need to put that because somebody is asking me to do it, but they don't really feel on their guts, that can have a positive effect. So I think that through workshops or trainings, especially for officers that do that job, that would be a way to finally use in a proper way the gender responsive procurement. The law already exists in Spain and in Barcelona, so we already have a law, so we already have like a legal document that supports a gender responsive procurement. What we need is trainings to people really understand how to use that clauses, how to use it on the procurement. With the Gendered Landscape program, our integrated action plan, we are including that. We as a city, we have a lot of weight on the economy of the city. So, if we manage to put proper clauses or gender clauses on the procurements, we can make a real change. Yeah, that it's not a feminist thing. It's a feminist thing, but at the end, it's like something that would help everybody and that would save all these, inequalities that we have in our society between men and women. And at the end, like the solution is pretty easy and it's in front of us. So it's just a matter of start and do it.
Okay, so I think the sound cut off slightly halfway through that clip, but I think you probably got an understanding of the key barriers that cities face. Like cities can be risk averse when it comes to gender responsive public procurement. They don't want to take too many risks. There's barriers around the legal framework we heard there. Whilst we have that European-wide directive and legislation, a lot of countries don't have specific strategies or policies around gender responsive public procurement. There's a challenge in terms of understanding exactly what we mean by gender equality and identifying specific gender equality outcomes in procurement processes. New cities have the capacity. There's challenges here around whether they have the time to consider gender equality in procurement, and those other strategic challenges that I talked about earlier, or whether they're just looking to buy the cheapest possible product as quickly as possible. It takes a little bit more time to think about wider outcomes. So those are some of those barriers that were identified there. The next stage of our training course, sorry, I started that a bit early. The next part was around, well, once you've identified those barriers, how do you actually start to overcome them? And there's three strands to this. The first bit is around policy and strategy. So you need to start thinking about gender equality in terms of your wider strategies and procedures. The second bit is in that design of services and goods and work. So think about it in the commissioning that I was talking about before. And the third bit is about tender itself in terms of what procedures you use in procurement terms and what questions you ask. So we're going to move on to the first part of that now to talk about how this fits with wider strategies. And I hope it's going to work.
In Urbac's online course on strategic procurement, we introduced the cycle of procurement, the 6 steps cities need to go through to embed social and environmental considerations into procurement. The steps for gender-responsive public procurement are exactly the same. One of our strategic procurement modules was about ensuring governance mechanisms and strategy are in place to enable social and environmental outcomes to be embedded in procurement. For gender-responsive public procurement, the principles are the same. Cities need to do 4 things. First, check the overarching strategies of their country, region, or city and identify whether there is a focus on gender equality. Second, explore existing procurement strategies and identify whether there is a focus upon gender responsiveness. This may be included in outcomes around social responsibility. Third, if there is not a coherent link between procurement and gender in national and local policy, then cities need to start to make the link themselves by identifying the types of gender responsive outcomes they want to embed and realise through the procurement process. For example, this could include increasing the percentage of women in a construction contract workforce or increasing the number of girls and women engaging with a public health service. Fourth, once the outcomes have been identified, then a programme of capacity building and training around gender responsive public procurement needs to be implemented. The focus here should not just be upon procurement teams. There needs to be a link between procurement teams, commissioners, those people designing goods and services, equality bodies, and those working in economic development.
Great, super. So that is at that stage 2, the identification of outcomes, and trying to link the process of procurement to wider strategy, thinking through whether there's a gender equality focus in the economic development strategy, the corporate strategy, the development plan of the municipality. So that's where you need to think about gender equality. And if it's not there, that's when you need to start to think about, well, can this really be a part of our procurement process? And what types of outcomes are important? So just to reiterate, I think that stage 2 is one of the most important parts of embedding gender responsive public procurement, because you're identifying exactly what outcomes you want to achieve. Next video is then you're thinking about the type of product or service that you're looking to buy. So you're thinking about the design of that procurement, you're thinking about that design of the school construction, you're thinking about the purchase of this pen, you're thinking about a public health service. And this is where you need to really start to think about how you embed gender equality and other strategic considerations into procurement. So I'm going to play the next video. And this is Sally talking about the commissioning process.
A further element of our strategic public procurement modules was around commissioning. This is the process used to design goods and services, which can also be called pre-procurement. It's at this stage where cities should be actively considering the relevance of social, environmental, and gender-responsive outcomes to the nature of the goods or services they're procuring. Indeed, there are a number of steps that cities need to go through if they're going to embed gender-responsive outcomes during the commissioning phase. The first thing cities need to do when designing the good or service is to reflect upon whether the contract has a gender perspective, who the ultimate beneficiaries of the contract are, and if they include both women and men in all their diversity, and whether there are differences in situations of those women and men, which will mean a tailoring of the delivery of that contract. These should also explore how men, women, boys and girls currently use the service that's being procured. It's important to look for data, to consult widely, and to not make assumptions, for instance, based on past service use. Once cities have decided it is relevant to include gender-responsive public procurement in their contract opportunity, then the second thing they need to do during this pre-procurement is some initial market engagement. This is where procurers identify businesses that may be interested in bidding for the contract and talk to them about their wider requirements. This provides cities not only with the opportunity to understand the types of businesses that might be able to deliver upon the requirements of the contract, but also to explain the importance that gender responsiveness plays in their procurement process and will play in the decision-making around the successful supplier. The third thing cities need to do is to set out the scope of the goods or services which they're looking to procure, and if relevant, set out requirements around gender responsiveness. Procurers could give the contract opportunity a title that explicitly refers to gender equality. For example, design, build and manage sports centres that promote equal participation. Or they could directly refer to the needs of men and women in the delivery of the service. For example, in a mobility service, there'll be differences in journey times and usage requirements for public transport. Then the fourth thing that cities need to decide upon during this commissioning phase is the type of public procurement procedure they're going to utilise and whether to divide the contract into lots. Some procedures, such as competitive dialogue and innovation partnerships, are more about developing relationships with suppliers and will potentially enable a greater focus upon gender responsiveness. Breaking a contract into smaller lots can help ensure the participation of a wide range of bidders, including small and medium-sized enterprises, social enterprises, and women-led businesses.
Okay, so that's the real stage to think about embedding gender equality into procurement processes, the design of the goods and services. I've got 3 examples, but we're going to leave these until the conversation a little bit later on. But I want you to have a think about these three examples, and we'll ask for your responses when we come to the discussion a little bit later on. But what do we think are the gender considerations in the procurement of construction uniforms? So what do we need to think about when buying those construction uniforms? What do we think are the gender considerations in a mobility scheme? So what do we need to think about from a gender perspective in the design of a mobility scheme and the delivery and the procurement of that mobility scheme? And what do we think of the gender considerations in the procurement of temporary workers to work at your municipality? So we'll do them three again. So what do we think of the gender considerations in construction uniforms, in a mobility scheme, and in the procurement of temporary workers? And we'll come back to that a little bit later on in the conversation and the discussion after we finish the videos. So we've done two of the stages there of the procurement cycle of where gender equality can be embedded into procurement. We talked about strategy, and we talked about the design and commissioning of services. The third bit is then in the actual tender process itself. And this is where it does get a little bit more technical in terms of the types of procedures and the types of things that you can do from a procurement perspective to embed gender equality into procurement. So this video is slightly longer than some of the other ones, so please bear with me.
Another of our strategic procurement modules was around the tender itself and decision-making of the winning supplier. In the case of social and environmental considerations, this is where procurers ask a range of questions around social and environmental value and the additional benefits potential suppliers are going to deliver. For gender-responsive public procurement, this is about including one or more criteria around gender responsiveness. There are generally 4 types of criteria that can be utilised for gender-responsive public procurement. First, cities can use exclusion grounds, where suppliers are ruled out of a procurement procedure if they do not meet certain requirements. For example, suppliers can be ruled out if they do not provide evidence that women and men are paid equally for the same type of work. Another example could be that suppliers can be ruled out if they have more than 250 employees and do not have an equalities plan. Second, cities can use selection criteria, which can address considerations around the technical capability, professional skills, and qualifications of potential suppliers. For example, to deliver a community health service, a supplier would have to demonstrate prior experience in reaching both men and women. Third, cities can use technical specifications to ensure the different needs of women and men are included in the technical parts of the delivery of the goods or services. For example, in the procurement of social housing, planning and design may affect men and women differently. Older women and lone parents might need different sized apartments and communal spaces. Safety features could include street lighting and access to connecting public transport. These could form part of the technical specification. Fourth, cities can use specific award criteria around gender, so long as they are relevant to the nature of the good or service being procured. For example, if they were procuring for temporary workers through an employment agency, then they could include an award criteria around the gender equality of those temporary workers.
I've just given away the answer to one of my questions from before, but never mind. I can see, Lara, you were enjoying the music during that video, which is great. So those are some of the more technical things. Yeah. So those are some of the more technical things. And you probably wouldn't be involved in that kind of very technical procurement exercise, right? So these are up to the people that work in procurement teams within your organization. Right. I've just got one more video, and then what we'll do, we'll then break, and then we'll have chance for questions and discussion and conversation. So the last video is a case study. It's a case study of the city of Vienna, who are going to talk about those three strands that I've been talking about throughout, about strategy, about commissioning, and about tendering. So we'll go to that video of Vienna.
The city of Vienna is an important public client. It spends millions of euros per year commissioning goods and services. The discussion to use this economic power as a tool to push gender equality forward in the private sector started around 2004-2005. This was more or less at the same time when gender budgeting was implemented in Vienna. The main idea was to boost equal pay, work against gender stereotypes, and help women to get in leading positions. In the years that followed, the Women's Office in Vienna conducted detailed analysis on EU and national procurement laws, as well as research about pilot projects on gender equality and public procurement, like the one in Berlin. And of course, there was intensive lobbying and networking within the administration and politics to spread the idea. The political driving force in Vienna was the City Councillor for Women's Affairs, with the mandate given to the Women's Department. Within the framework of the government program in 2010, a pilot project on gender equality and public procurement was agreed, and a working group was established by the Chief Executive Director of the City of Vienna. This meant that from now on, there was backing from politics and the top of the administration.
The working group developed a model that takes into account advancement of women and gender aspects in public procurement under the federal procurement law. It means that awarding public contracts in Vienna is tied to measures for the advancement of women in companies. And prior to the official start, the model was reviewed by external legal experts and an exchange between city representatives with the Chamber of Commerce that took place. Gender-responsive public procurement is now implemented in Vienna in 3 ways. First, the implementation of measures for the promotion of women is a mandatory social condition for contract performance. Second, women's promotion and gender issues are formulated as concrete qualitative award criteria. And these awarding criteria can, for instance, demand a certain gender qualification of the staff responsible for the realization of the contract. For example, research on the situation of the labor market. And third, by the consideration of women's promotion and gender issues in demand assessment, procurement planning and specification of services. This one is addressed to the municipal departments rather than the potential bidders. Projects to be tendered have to be checked with regards to their gender relevance, for example, when preparing a public lighting concept or a participatory process. Going back to the implementation of measures for the promotion of women as a mandatory social condition for contract performance. Bidders can select activities from a catalogue of measures. They then commit to implement these measures during the performance of the contract. These measures apply to all service contracts that meet the following criteria. The tenderer employs more than 20 people. The total estimate contract value exceeds 50,000 euros. And the contract has a minimum duration of 6 months. Proof of the successful implementation must be furnished at the latest halfway through the contract period. Infringements are sanctioned in one of the following ways. Fine of 1 per million of the contract value per week, fine of up to 1% of the contract value, fine of up to 10,000 euros. Any infringement also harms the trustworthiness of a tenderer and may lead to a rejection of future tenders. In smaller businesses, there are up to 50 employees and with a maximum balance sheet total of 10 million euro allowed to omit one action from Group B or C. The section Gender Mainstreaming developed a forum to facilitate this check for gender relevance together with contracting departments. And support is also given both to colleagues across the organization and to suppliers with checklists, model courses, catalogs of measures and backup advice. Gender-responsive public procurement in Vienna is also applied across quite a few product or services sectors, such as urban planning, cleaning services, training services, IT services, bus services for disabled persons, and research studies.
The key factors for a successful gender-responsive procurement in Vienna have been, first, the creation of a collaborative working group, Gender experts, legal departments, and representatives of various municipal services have been working together right from the start. Second, offering regular training and developing a gender checklist together with representatives of the concerned municipal departments. Third, offering accompanying measures for entrepreneurs and potential bidders like manuals with checklists and workshops. Fourth, spreading information that proves that advancement of women pays off and that companies already practicing implementation are satisfied with the results. Fifth, involving highly renowned legal experts. This is a valuable support whenever discussion comes up. Six, and last but not least, you need wholehearted political support and support by the senior management.
Great, super. Lara, I think I've just about made it within the hour. I think we're at 3 o'clock CET. I'd just like to make a few final points and then we'll open up for conversation. I think the first point is that I think this is a really big opportunity for the cities that are involved in the Inhabit project, but also in some of the other organisations that are participating in this workshop today, because very few cities across Europe are doing work around gender responsive public procurement. When we were putting together this course, we only found 4 or 5 cities that have actually got gender-focused procurement strategies in place. So I think it's a real big opportunity. And that kind of links to my second point, is that the city of Famalicão in Portugal, they're looking to run a URBACT action planning network specifically on the topic of gender responsive public procurement. So if you want to be involved in a specific project that's focused upon gender responsiveness and procurement, I think that's quite a good opportunity. My third point is that all this takes time, right? You're not going to be able to go back to your cities tomorrow, speak to your procurement people and officers and say, look, we're going to embed a more strategic approach to procurement, and we're going to embed a gender responsive public procurement approach. It just won't happen in those timeframes. This is a long-term strategic approach that needs to happen. And that links to my fourth point, is that there needs to be political leadership for this to be effective. There needs to be a drive from politicians within your city. And fifth, there needs to be cultural change. And those responsible for designing and procuring goods and services need to start to think differently. They need to move away from this focus upon cost and upon legislation and a little bit about quality, to actually think about social, environmental, local economic and gender considerations. And my last point is that this is not just about municipalities. Lots of different organisations within cities will have responsibility for buying goods and services. Universities, hospitals, schools, a whole range of different organisations. So those organisations also need to think differently about how they procure. Lara, I'm going to stop sharing just so I can see everyone, and also just to check everyone's still okay. And then I think perhaps if we have a little kind of 5-minute comfort break, and then we come back, and so that people have the opportunity just to reflect, because I realise from kind of playing all the videos, there's a huge amount of information to take in there. So perhaps if we take 5 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll have a bit more of a conversation and we can take questions. Is that okay, Lara?
Yeah, of course. So thank you very much, Matthew. I think that was a very good overview of all the work that URBACT support that you did also in this frame. And obviously, I mean, I shared it already among the people in Inhabit, but I see that there are also some people from sister projects, so they are welcome in our group. And so we will distribute also the tools and some the videos that are online. I mean, URBACT went through a new restyling of the website, but all these materials are there, and so you can take notes and see the videos again that Matthew played in a dense presentation before. So yes, we take the 5 minutes pause, and then I would suggest to everyone to come back with some ideas, also concrete questions that are challenging questions about what you are doing in your own environment, in your own cities, and see how this can be, this lesson of Matthew can be played out in your localities. And other things, it would be extremely nice to see also your face, because it creates a more familiar atmospheres, and we see that we don't speak in the void. So have your coffee, and we'll see each other back by 6 minutes. Let's do at 15:10. We're back here. Thank you, Matthew, so far, and everyone else.
Thanks, Laura. See you all soon.
See you in a bit.